Factsverse presents. These two women thought money brought happiness, and they were sadly mistaken. For some people, love is more important than money. For others, money is more important. There are people who put money ahead of everything. Unfortunately, things often don't work out for these people. I've got a couple of stories about how a person's money obsession and desire to have it backfired on them. I'll give you the story of these two ladies in just a moment. First, help us out by clicking that like button, and also be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. We'll begin with Angie's story. Angie and Sean met in college. They really hit it off and they loved spending time together. The only problem was that the two of them, they came from different worlds. Sean's parents both worked. His father worked in a factory and his mother was an elementary school teacher. While Sean never went without the things that he needed, his parents weren't able to afford the luxuries in life. Sean and his two siblings, they learned the value of $1, and his parents were proud of that. The family lived in a 3-bedroom raised ranch, and Sean and his brothers all had to share a single room. Angie, however, her life was different. Both of her parents came from money and continued to make a lot of money once they got together. Her father ran a very successful business, which meant her mother didn't have to work. Instead, she held dinner parties and organized charity fundraisers. Angie grew up never wanting for anything. From the day she was born, she was given anything she ever wanted. She grew up in a huge home complete with tennis courts, a swimming pool. She wore the most expensive clothes and jewelry. And every year, Angie and her parents would take fabulous vacations all over the world. Sean had to work and save his money for a couple of years to afford to buy a car for himself. Angie was given a brand new car for her 16th birthday. Sean worked for everything he had, while Angie had everything handed to her. Well, although the two were brought up completely differently, they had a great relationship. Sean really loved Angie, and she loved him. Sean wanted to spend the rest of his life with Angie. He saved what little money he had left after paying his bills, and he bought Angie an engagement ring. He couldn't afford a full-carat diamond, but, well, he didn't care. He thought the ring was just to symbolize the engagement. When the day came and he asked Angie to marry him, he was shocked when she said no. This daughter of a millionaire refused to marry him because he was poor. Angie told Sean she could never marry him because he couldn't afford to give her the life that her wealthy father had. She told him that she had financial needs that he would never be able to meet. Sean was understandably crushed. Angie wounded Sean's pride and broke his heart. As much as he loved her, Angie made her feelings clear, and Sean knew the relationship would never work. So they broke up and went their separate ways. Sean didn't see or hear from Angie for years. About 10 years after she turned down his proposal, they ran into each other at the mall. They talked for a few minutes before Sean asked if she was married now. Angie told him that yes, she was married to a wealthy man. She said that her husband made $15,000 per month and that things were going well. Sean was a bit crushed, but he didn't let it show. While the two were speaking, Angie's husband Robert joined them. When he saw Sean, he shook his hand and said, "Hello, Mr. Carter." Angie looked stunned. She couldn't figure out how her husband knew her ex and why he was being so formal. When Sean said his goodbyes, Angie asked Robert how he knew her ex. Robert told her that Sean was his boss, and that Sean owned the company he worked for. Angie was shocked. She knew that her husband worked for a multi-million-dollar company, and now she finds out that her ex-fiancé owns that company? That meant Sean was much more wealthy and successful than her husband. Angie asked Robert how it was that Sean was able to be so successful. Robert told her that he had heard that a girl broke his heart years ago because he didn't make enough money, so he went out and started a company so he could get rich. Robert told Angie that he was told Sean's heart was broken and he threw himself into his work. Angie couldn't believe what she was hearing. She gave up a great guy who loved her over money, only to find that he was more successful than her rich husband. By now, though, it was too late. Angie was married to another man who had no chance of ever being as successful as Sean. At that moment, she realized that she had thrown her entire life away because of money. Let's take a look at Becky's story. Becky was dating a man named Mark. Mark had a good job as a computer programmer and he lived comfortably. Becky lived with Mark, but she didn't have a job. But she didn't have any problem letting Mark support her either. Whenever Becky wanted something, Mark made sure to buy it for her. Becky had a pretty good life. She spent her days shopping, eating at restaurants, and planning expensive vacations for her and Mark to take. Well, one day Mark came home and Becky told him that she got a job where she'd be working 2 days a week. She told him that she needed a new expensive phone with features that her current phone didn't have. Well, Mark didn't think twice about that, and he spent $1,000 on a new phone for Becky. Most people would have told her that a phone is a phone, that she didn't need one that cost that much money. But he didn't do that. Mark just wanted Becky to be happy and find some success in her new job. So he didn't mind spending so much on Becky because, well, he loved her. And the next day, Becky had her expensive phone in her hand. And everything was great until the day that Mark's car got repossessed. Becky was home when the repo man came to take the car. They told her that he was 3 months behind in his payments. When she saw this happening, she knew that she had to end this relationship. For Becky, money was more important than Mark. She was worried that he wasn't capable of making enough money to support her in the way that she thought she deserved. Rather than sticking around, she decided that she'd find a man who was more capable of taking care of her. She told Mark that she could no longer be with him because she didn't want to live a life where she had to struggle financially. Becky packed her things and moved out of the house. She even packed the phones that Mark bought and paid for. The next day, Mark called the bank and found out they'd actually made a mistake. Mark went to see his mother while Becky was at the house packing, and while at his mom's house, he paid the repo fee and was ready to get his car back. The next day, he found out that the bank had made an error and that the car should never have been repossessed. They credited his account and everything was settled. With Becky being out of the house now, Mark felt that it was no longer his obligation to pay her cell phone bills, so he turned them both off. Becky was furious. She used a friend's phone to call him and ask about it. He told her that it was no longer up to him to support her. He also mentioned that he just found out that he was getting promoted at work, and the promotion came with a huge raise. Becky was furious. She couldn't believe that she left him only to find out that he had more than enough money for them to both live comfortably. She was living now in a tiny room at her mother's house with no heat and no air conditioning. She didn't have the money for a car. She had to beg friends for a ride on the 2 days a week that she worked. She couldn't afford the expensive bill for that fancy phone that she insisted Mark buy for her. She had to buy a cheap, prepaid phone. Things were getting worse by the day for Becky, and things were really looking up for Mark. When Becky saw how great Mark was doing, it made her angry. To get him back, she tried to have the electricity at his house turned off 3 times. Each time they called Mark to confirm, and he let them know that he never made that phone call to them. She started calling his phone and hanging up at all hours of the night. She even went as far as dumping trash in Mark's yard. She wanted to do whatever she could to make Mark's life as miserable as hers was. A few months later, Becky found out that Mark had moved on. He bought a gorgeous house that made her mother's house look like a shack. Mark was wealthy, successful, and happy. Becky was still living with her mother, working 2 days a week, and was trying to pay off the $40,000 that she owed from student loans. She left Mark because she was worried about struggling financially, and it totally backfired on her. Both of these stories show that you can't judge somebody by the amount of money that they make. Had Angie stuck around and waited for Sean to be a success, she would have ended up with somebody who worshipped her and could have taken care of her financially. If Becky didn't think that she could do better and try to find a richer man, she wouldn't have ended up spending most of her adult life in a tiny room in her mother's house. Money, it's nice to have, sure, but it's not everything. Both of the men in these stories had amazing potential that their girlfriends failed to see. When both women left in hopes of finding something bigger and better, new women came into their men's lives. These new women saw the potential, and money wasn't all they thought about. Do you know of anybody who's made this same kind of mistake? Tell us the story in the comments below and subscribe for more.